Wherever you are, everyone, just get comfy, maybe shake anything out. Let's just take a deep breath before we get started together. So we'll take a big inhale through the nose. And let something go when you exhale. Welcome. I am so excited about tonight's webinar. I'm Danielle, the National Educator at Sigmatic, and I'm here with Heather Irvine. I'm going to give her a formal introduction here in a moment, but just really excited for what we have in store for you tonight. It really feels like a super timely moment to be having this discussion, and I hope that after tonight you leave with maybe more questions than you started with, and we get to open some doors and bring a sense of curiosity and love and connection to so many of the herbs and the fungi that are always here as allies to support us in challenging times. And that's really how I look at that. I'm like, we have these friends all around us that are supporting us and can offer us different, different things, whether it's, we'll go so much into it. I'm like, I'm going to get taken away and carried off by the herbs, but there's so much we're going to cover tonight. And before we jump into that, just a couple housekeeping items. If you would like to ask questions, tell us where you're from, interact with us at all during tonight's talk, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So the chat is disabled, but the Q&A feature is there for all of you to use. And both Heather and I can see that. So even though you might not be able to see it with one another until we answer it, not to worry, Heather and I are seeing your questions and your comments come through. Additionally, I have to make a small disclaimer that although Heather and I are both clinical herbalists, we are not your healthcare practitioner. And so what that means is we can't speak to any specific diseases or ailments that you're going through. We can speak to the herbs and the mushrooms and any ingredients that you're curious about. We have a whole lineup of amazing allies that we'll be speaking on tonight. But if you do have specific questions about your body and your needs, and we'll talk about why that is too, why we're not going to talk about the specific body and how it's actually part of both Heather and I's philosophy as herbalists, this individualized approach to using the plants and the mushrooms. So we won't be mentioning diseases, but please tell us, any other questions that you have. And we're happy to offer resources so that you can go find your clinical herbalist if that's something you're interested in after this talk tonight. So before we jump in, I want to introduce you all to Heather of the Herbal Academy. Heather joins us today as one of the many educators and a clinical herbalist of the Herbal Academy, where she teaches and interacts with students and contributes to publications and course development and delivers thoughtful approaches to complex topics in herbalism. So welcome, Heather.
It's so great to be here. Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah, so happy to have you. Is there any other housekeeping items before we jump in to what is the immune system? Why is it important?
Yeah, I think we can jump in. Shall I start?
Yes, kick us off.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit about the immune system, and then I promise we're getting quickly into the herbs. But we do definitely like to think of things, Danielle and I both, in a holistic way, and we like to think about energetics. We like to think about, not necessarily like an herb for an issue, but to have a little bit of background and understanding. So just to make sure that we have some common terms, I'm going to mention the kind of three main parts of the immune system. So the first sort of layer of defense would be the external protections, which, it may at first seem kind of boring. These are boring for some, interesting for others. These are just things like healthy skin and healthy skin flora, mucosal membranes, sinuses, even aspects of the respiratory system, and aspects of the digestive system as well. And I would include our habits in this as well, as far as like sleep hygiene, as far as how we're interacting with the world and consciousness about that. So these, that part seems like kind of the more simplistic layer, although there is quite a lot to it. The next sort of layer is what we call the innate immune system. And this is the one that, even newborn babies have. It doesn't require any kind of exposure to pathogens prior or anything like that. So have an ambulance going by. So, so with the innate immune system, these include cells like phagocytes, cells like natural killer cells, and other types. Macrophages are included, so these are cells that are looking for, or are sort of circulating and can bump into foreign proteins, things that aren't necessarily of our body, or that aren't familiar inputs, because these could potentially be a bacteria, or like a viral particle or virus, or a pathogenic fungi, or sometimes it's a fluke, sometimes it's not, it's not a pathogen. And so this is sort of the non-specific part of the immune system that circulates and is looking for things that are not us. So it's considered like a little bit more crude, but it is super important. And I always say no body part is an island. So even though this part of the immune system seems like the kind of like not as intelligent part, it also is, some of these cells are able to, if they're more active, if they are doing more phagocytosis, they're able to send, or they send some signals that help the next step to be a little bit more vigilant. So that next step is the acquired immune system, which I think isn't too hard to remember, because you're acquiring it based on exposure, based on, I guess it's just going to be that hour with the ambulances. You're acquiring it based on exposure to pathogens or to substances, like allergens could even be included. So this is a little bit more specific, and we typically think of this, when we're talking about antigens, and specific recognition. So if you hear of T cells, and I think that's probably going to be a part of tonight, if you hear of T cells, this is more along the lines of acquired immunity. And these cells are more specific. So there are types of T cells that respond to different types of bacteria, some that are more, that are vigilant and are sort of designed to, or, recognize viruses, others that recognize parasites, and even allergies are implicated in this, because T cells can pick up on proteins that aren't us, or sometimes that are us, and cause a kind of immune reaction, sometimes that's not overall beneficial or comfortable. And we know that mushrooms are very good at that juncture of helping to support T cells in kind of a just perfectly optimal way. So I don't know if Danielle, you wanted to go into that now.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
great.
speak on that quickly. Thanks. That's a really great overview of the different layers. Heather and I thought it'd be helpful to just talk about, what is the immune system? What are these different layers? And I love that metaphor of no island part is a body, because it's really, it's not like our immune system lives in one specific place in our body. There's immune cells all over our body, and that's where we'll talk about holistic approaches to supporting our body and why that's so important when it comes to immune health. But where the mushrooms come in is, and where it feels so relevant to be talking about functional mushrooms at this time, and in association with the immune system, is many of our functional mushrooms are known as immunomodulators. And so when we typically think about herbs or any natural support for our immune system, we think of either immune stimulants or immunosuppressants, right? Things that upregulate or downregulate immune activity in the body. And so a lot of our kind of go-to immune herbs, and we'll get into this in our materia medica a bit later, they temporarily stimulate the immune system. And that can be beneficial for a short amount of time, but we don't want to stimulate our immune system for more than really a couple days to maybe a week max. And this is where the functional mushrooms really differ, especially at a time like today, where we're looking for options to support our immune system daily that we can use consistently for weeks to perhaps even months at a time. And our functional mushrooms are known as tonics, meaning they really work on a root based level in our body to build, to nourish, to revitalize the system. And part of that is that immunomodulation activity. So, for those of you that have heard me talk about mushrooms for the immune system before, you know this famous metaphor that I like to use. They're like cruise control for the immune system, right? So they have this ability, if each of our bodies, which each of our bodies do, function at a different speed optimally. So let's say Heather functions at 70 miles an hour and I function at 60 miles an hour, right? Each of our bodies are innately unique. And we'll talk about that later when we go into a bit about our constitutions. You know, in all traditional systems of natural medicine, whether it's traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda or different, you know, folk medicines, there's almost always this understanding that not all body is the same. And so we each have a different base. We each have different things that we're doing every day, different stressors, things that we're eating, and that is all contributing to our immune system. And so what functional mushrooms do as modulators is they have the ability, so let's say, you know, my perfect functioning speed is 60 miles an hour, still on this cruise control idea, and my body becomes vulnerable, right? I become weak. There's something crazy happening, and I'm really stressed out. So my body is weakened. I can take an extract of a reishi mushroom, for example, and that extract can activate, can stimulate immune cells in my body and bring me back up to that 60 miles an hour if I dropped, you know, say to 50. The same thing goes in an overactive immune system. So this is the case with autoimmune conditions. That's in my clinical practice, I specialized in autoimmune treatment with functional mushroom-based formulas. And in autoimmune conditions, that 60 miles an hour ramps up to say 70 or 80 miles an hour, right? There's too much immune activity happening. So that same reishi mushroom extract in the overactive immune body can suppress that immune activity to bring them again back to that 60 mile an hour, right? So it's that cruise control metaphor. It feels really, really fitting. And if there's one thing, there's a few things that our functional mushrooms have in common, but one of them is this constituent, right? So all of our plants and fungi are made up of different compounds. And one of the most studied compounds in our mushrooms are the sugars. They're the polysaccharides, these complex sugar chains. Many of them are beta glucans, right? So this subcategory of the polysaccharides. And the polysaccharides what offer that immunomodulation property in our functional mushrooms. And so no matter where you are at, you know, right now in your body and your health, functional mushrooms are a really safe entry point. We rank herbs based on their level of intensity, and functional mushrooms, although they're powerful in their ability to support our bodies, they're in the same kind of level as things like chamomile and some of our mints, right? These really gentle herbs, because of this ability to more nourish and support our bodies rather than push us in one direction too strongly or another. So immunomodulators.
Yeah, I love that, and I love immunomodulators. And you know, I always think of like too much like vigilance all the time isn't necessarily a good thing, right? So that's kind of how I think about either autoimmune concerns or like why we would choose the immune modulators and the mushroom tonics. And just to kind of add to that, because that was really great, I thought of a couple specifics that are applicable. The way that I learned it, these beta glucans actually interface probably in other places too, but in our gut when we take, which is why it's great to take like to use water based preparations, to use something like a powder, you know, a powder based kind of delivery or decoction, because you want to get a certain amount of exposure with certain tissue in your GI tract, which then which has, which then is an immune organ that's in the gut, the Peyer's patches. And then this kind of talks to the rest of the immune system to, promote vigilance towards bacteria or viruses, but tends to like kind of smooth out the possibility for things like allergies or autoimmune issues. At least is the way that I have learned the immune tonic mushroom. So it's really pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I love that. And we can talk about extraction a little more, like best methods to extract certain compounds from different herbs or mushrooms. But I love that you brought that up. Polysaccharides are sugars, right? So they're water soluble. So if we're looking for the more immune forward support from our mushrooms, it is really important that we make a water extract, right? So put it in your crock pot for 6-8 plus amount of hours. I'm really a fan of long decoctions. And then the other piece you mentioned, when we're trying to get our compounds to different areas of the body, it's also important to consider the delivery method, right? So when we think about taking a tincture, alcohol is often absorbed in our stomach, right? So if you're taking a tincture for gut health, to actually reach your microbiome in your intestines, it's a little counterintuitive, right? You want to ensure that those compounds actually make their way into the area of the body that you're looking to have that support with. And before we jump in, there's like so many amazing questions that you're all asking, but we do have a question that says, can you please elaborate on the reasoning behind not wanting to stimulate the immune system for too long? So maybe Heather, you take it and then I'll jump in as well.
Yeah. I mean, well, the way that I've learned to understand it and really believe it is that, it's kind of, I don't know, what comes to mind is it's kind of like a muscle. It can't do like maximum exertion all the time. And so, or another way of thinking of it is that if you're taking something that's going to supposedly boost or upregulate, let's say your innate immunity, it's possible that the body gets used. So there are reasons that some of the herbs especially have a little bit of like an immune stimulant effect. And in some cases it's because it is something a little bit unfamiliar to the body. And so it does create like a little bit more vigilance momentarily. But the thing is, if you were to take that herb or substance every day, it's possible, and we think that eventually your body becomes that, that input becomes a little bit mute to it. It becomes, your body isn't necessarily seeing that as like a reason to exert more or to be more vigilant. And so I would say it's maybe not that we don't always want to optimize immune function, but that certain things that are immune stimulant may wear off in effect. And so it's nice to reserve that influence for instances when you may need it more, based on fatigue or potential exposure to something, or just feeling that you have like a common cold or something coming on.
I love that muscle analogy. That's perfect. Yeah. And I think we haven't really spoken on this too much, but both Heather and I really resonate with this vitalism idea. I'm personally trained in the vitalist tradition, and vitalist herbalism is all about really understanding. We have all sorts of distractions in the background. I have like someone busting loud tunes driving by behind me.
I can't hear, so that's good. That's good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I like totally. Oh, vitalism. Yes.
Yeah, vitalism. Get grounded, Danielle.
Right. No, for real. 2 feet on the ground.
You're good. You're good.
Vitalism is, how I look at it is, we all have this vital force. Our bodies are evolved to know how to heal on its own. And there's certain blockages perhaps that kind of prohibit our life force from flowing optimally. And those things can be physical things. Those things can be things we're eating, things like stress, food allergens. And there's certain deficiencies as well. If we're deficient in critical minerals or vitamins from enabling our body's life force, vital flow from working at 100%, there's certain kind of negative manifestations that can come from that. And so a vital approach is how can we remove obstacles and replenish what needs to be replenished in the body so that the body can do its work on its own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as if, you know, you have something going on topically and you put something onto, even if it's herbal, to make that go away. That's more of this allopathic approach. A vitalist approach would be like, interesting, you have something expressing itself on the skin. I wonder what's going on internally. What's happening with your organs of detoxification? How's your gut health? How's your liver functioning? And really addressing from the root in which the problem is stemming from, rather than, you know, treating the symptom. And so when it comes to using immune stimulants, and we'll talk about them specifically, but, you know, probably our most famous immune stimulant is Echinacea. And Echinacea is wonderful for a short period of time. And Heather will go much deeper into this, but it's a good example of why we don't want to use the stimulants long term. Is when we use a stimulant like Echinacea. So Echinacea has these compounds called alkamides, right? If anyone's taken a Echinacea tincture, it gives you that really tingly feeling on your tongue. And what the alkamides are doing are essentially tricking your body to thinking that there's a foreign antigen in you. And so in response, your body boosts production of all sorts of immune cells to fight off what it thinks is that invader. And so it's not quite vitalist, right? We're tricking our body. And again, as Heather mentioned, there can be this response where if we're continuously kind of tricking our body and forcing our body to produce, you know, an excess of certain cells, of certain, you know, hormonal changes, we're kind of taking ourselves off kilter. We're not enabling our vital force to flow optimally. So I'd rather think about what can we do to build and nourish so we don't need that stimulation every single day, but that the body is strong enough to not be a host for whatever is around you in the first place. Hopefully
Absolutely. Yeah.
oh, we got another one.
I know. I live in a place you would think is quiet, but is not. So, yeah. Should we touch on Echinacea and sort of, or some immune stimulants and when you might reserve those for, and then
Yes.
we can, yeah, move deeper
Yes.
still. Okay. So yeah. So, kind of the sort of classic, easily identifiable, in Western herbalism immune stimulant is Echinacea. And I like to partner with Echinacea. I'm not saying take them together, but I would like to compare to Echinacea the herb Spilanthes as somewhat interchangeable. So what Danielle was saying, absolutely. These two, and especially we know Echinacea stimulates phagocytes. So some of the innate immune system, it increases the mobility of white blood cells. And you know, once we get into that type of action, or some of the more kind of like vigilant actions that really only happen when typically only happen when there's like a suspicion that there is a pathogen that needs to be handled. The cost to the body is a little bit more energetically, it's a little bit energetically greater, and you're tapping into a little bit deeper resources, and sometimes getting into, you know, releasing and increasing production of immune cells that may, you know, typically kind of you know, concentrate in, or, you know, have reserves in like the bone marrow, or around the, you know, the lymph organs. So it is something that's like a little bit more of an event for the body, and a little bit more energetically, you know, a little bit more of energetic cost. So this is one of the many things that Echinacea or Spilanthes could be good at. So this is the kind of thing that we like when we have like a little bit of a scratchy throat, or we, you know, think we maybe might have, you know, been exposed to a common cold or something of that nature, or just are, you know, have a little bit of incidental greater fatigue, you know, as well as just common exposure in life. Some sources say, you know, that you want to just use this for like the first couple of days of something. Interestingly, there was a Spilanthes study that showed that it increased immune function, like with a peak around 15 days. So that's something to consider for sort of those like winter common cold issues that that you sort of know or feel will last a little bit longer. But this is one, these two herbs are ones that are a little bit more stimulating in nature. And you actually feel and taste that with Echinacea and Spilanthes too. So get used to kind of using your senses, as well as what you learn about herbs or mushrooms to, make some associations and also help you kind of remember how to use these or when. Little plug for Spilanthes, because it's lesser known than Echinacea and can be grown pretty easily. It's also been shown to be to have kind of like it's called an antipyretic, so it can help with resolution of a fever. And it's also somewhat antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory. So even though inflammation is a functional response to things, this is an herb that might help boost some of your immune functions, but sort of help to calm some of the, uncomfortable actions and symptoms that sometimes hang around longer than they are functional or useful. But we've seen Spilanthes increase macrophage activity, as well as really when you look at any of these herbs there, it depends on what the study's looking for. You see a range of types of activity, but it tends to be more on kind of that innate immune system stimulating effect. So at the beginning of things is when this can be, can help to ramp up the type of response that you would like.
Yeah, that's great. And Marissa had a great question, and I want to clarify because she said, can you elaborate on alcohol-based tinctures? She has a cabinet full of these herbal tinctures at home. So she's staying tuned to hear more thoughts about the best ways to extract the immune boosting herbs. And so there's nothing wrong with tinctures at all, Marissa. Tinctures are wonderful. And it depends on both the species that you're using as well as what compounds you want to extract from that plant or mushroom, right? So when it comes to our functional mushrooms, then I'll let Heather talk a bit about, tincturing some of our plants. Alcohol is a great way to break open the chitin cell wall of our fungi and actually enable many of the compounds to become bioavailable to our bodies. When we're tincturing our mushrooms, we're in an alcohol, possibly in a glycerin, but or in a little bit, but you are getting the terpenes, right? The alcohol or oil soluble compounds. And when we were talking about the sugars in mushrooms, that's what we were talking about. Sugars are water soluble, right? And the sugars, these polysaccharides, are what are studied to be immune modulating. So when you're looking for that immune, wow, my words tonight, that immune effect from your mushrooms, I encourage making a decoction. But there's other benefits from using a tincture as well. So if you use a tincture, these terpenes are going to be more adaptogenic, especially when it comes to our mushrooms, right? So supporting our stress response. Kind of that same analogy I used, cruise control for the immune system. Think of that cruise control for the nervous system when we talk about adaptogens. And so it really just depends, what are you looking for from that species that you're working with, and what compounds are you looking to extract? And then you can choose to either make an alcohol extract, powder it, make a tea, etc. But keep your tinctures. We're not bashing tinctures at all, just explaining that different compounds come out in different mediums.
Yeah, definitely don't be overwhelmed by your tincture collection. A lot of the actions in the tinctures are going to be a little bit more immediate, and some of the constituents, like actually with Echinacea, alkalamides, which can be a little bit oil soluble, surprisingly, or alcohol soluble. Danielle and I were emphasizing we wanted to make things seem really accessible, because a lot of these herbs that we're used to just tincturing can be used as decoctions or infusions, and that's more of like a traditional way. But if you're thinking about Echinacea, a tincture is great, and actually those alkalamides are what give that tingly, sparkly feeling when you taste it. So whatever type of preparation you do, you can use your senses in this case to kind of, tell if it's potent. So absolutely many ways to use Echinacea in most of the herbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you, all of a sudden, we really wanted to touch on Echinacea, but Heather, that you also brought in Spilanthes right there, because something that we really wanted to share with you all tonight was that there are many options for the actions that you're looking for from our herbs or our mushrooms. So rather than saying, I need reishi, I need elderberry, I need echinacea, we want to encourage shifting that lens a little bit and looking at what actions, what energetics are you actually looking for from that plant or fungi. And then a whole slew of analogs might open up where you can either, someone asked earlier about seasonal herbs or local herbs, that there might be something growing in your area or that might be more abundant or more sustainable or perhaps just available that you can use instead. And that perhaps might work better for your body as well. So rather than like honing in on, okay, this is the plant for everyone or this is the mushroom for everyone, what is that species offering? And then how can you kind of be more flexible with your approach to it and know that that's not the only thing that you're able to do to support your immune system.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, on that, I mean, okay, we'll keep talking about the herbs, but I do at one point want to really, I meant to say this in the beginning, that herbal allies are one way to support, and mushroom allies, one way to support our immune system, but they're not the only way. And looking at immune support holistically is really critical to long-term sustainable support. So that being what we're eating, our stress levels, how we're sleeping, exercise, and we can talk about these things a little more, but I also wanted to make that disclaimer that it's not like a one size fits all, take this pill and you're done, or take this reishi tea and you're done, but knowing that this is one really great tool in your tool chest and making sure that there's others that you're bringing into, your daily life as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think hydration and sleep are greater than all of these, right? And food too, but kind of in that order: hydration, sleep, food, exercise, right? So absolutely.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah.
Our next herb, where do we want to go next?
Yeah, so we could go to ginger briefly. I like to talk about ginger because it, most everyone knows it. And it's something that's really comforting. It's also something that when, my friends who are kind of skeptical about all this stuff, except for when they're suffering and then want to know what they can do, most everybody has ginger, even if it's some older powdered ginger in the spice cabinet, and that's going to still be quite, potent because ginger has such drive and force and heat. So if that's the case for you or someone you're talking to, just use it, and use it liberally, and use it up when needed. So ginger. So, we're still in what I would probably characterize as immune stimulants. It definitely is known to increase macrophages. So that's kind of our little herbal science proof. But it also has this more kind of energetic and vitalist action that you can feel, right, of warming. So not only is that, kind of comforting when someone is going through perhaps like fevers or chills, or like the seasonal change that's happening for us now with, temperatures growing colder, but it actually has a little bit of an immune benefit as well, because some of the some things that our respiratory tract are more vulnerable to, it's thought are a little bit less virile if the body temperature is a little bit elevated, which is why we will manifest a fever. It's also why, some sources say it's why part of why things that affect like our sinuses can become more prevalent, or take a hold when the temperatures are cooling, just because of the change in the air temperature and this part of our body being slightly cooler than the rest. So it's one to know and to sort of extend to other spices. So, maybe your household doesn't have ginger, but you can think of many different spices like cayenne or even clove as sort of an extension of this sort of energetic support. And I'll mention that, we're hitting on a few herbs that we selected and then have some research, but almost every spice does have some research supporting its kind of antimicrobial and gentle in some, in one, at least one aspect of immune support. So with ginger, I'll leave it at that. And how to use it intuitively. You know, you don't need a necessarily special recipe to do it. So just use it as you see fit.
Yeah, I'll touch on that. I love using household spices as our herbal medicine. And when I go to someone's house or I'm in an Airbnb or whatever it is, there's always a few spices, and so many of them, as Heather mentioned, are actually very traditional and has been used for thousands of years in all sorts of cultures. And so even if you don't have an apothecary full of herbs, you likely have some kitchen spices that you can start utilizing right away. And ginger is such a great example of really understanding the energetics of a plant. So all humans and all of our plants and fungi have different energetics. And this is part of, choosing, like Heather mentioned, if you're looking for something warming, right, to increase the body temperature, you don't necessarily need ginger, but you can look at, okay, I'm looking for a warming herb or a warming spice. What is out there in my repertoire or in my spice cabinet? And so knowing that there's kind of four different temperaments that every herb or body can have. So there's the scale of temperature, right? So you're either warm or cold. So warm herbs, our gingers, like cayennes. Cold herb, most of our herbs are cold. Think of like a mint or like a
Skullcap or cucumber is the food. Yeah.
Yes. And then, so that temperature range, and then also the moisture range. So then our herbs can either be really drying or really what we call demulcent or mucilaginous, right? So in the drying side, think of nettle, for example. We have a lot of really drying herbs. And our demulcent herbs are things more like plantain or our marshmallow roots, flax and chia, aloe, slippery elm, right? And so knowing, okay, every herb is either going to have some range of that warm, cold, or dry, moist. And then knowing your own body temperature, and maybe we can all like take a moment to just think about what your own constitution might be, because that's how you're going to choose your herbs most appropriately and how they're going to be most effective, right? I really think of herbal medicine like matchmaking, and it takes into account the individual body. So, think if you're in a room with a bunch of people, probably not as common today, but when we used to be, and if you're the one that has a big sweatshirt on, or if you're the one that's always hot, and has a little tank top on, that could give you an indication of what your base temperature constitution might be, right? And then on the moist dry scale, think about, this can be expressed in so many ways. If you're experiencing dryness, maybe you have crackly skin or dryness in your digestion. And so just, after the call or even now, you can take a few moments and think about what your constitution might be. And then you can choose the herbs that Heather and I are speaking about tonight based on things that would fit your body's needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would add to that, think about if you go to a drier climate, like if you visit the Southwest, a lot of herbalists I know hate it. I love it. So think about, like, does your skin improve, or does your health, does your sort of general feeling of vitality and well-being, improve, or is it more challenged when you travel to different climates? That can be a really great clue to this energetic piece as well.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I just moved this week from Colorado to California, and I was living at almost 6,000 feet elevation, which is inherently really drying. So I was constantly adding herbal demulcents, right, into my teas just to keep me balanced. And now for the past 4 days only, I've been at sea level. And so my tea formulas are really changing because my body is changing. And so that's also such an important piece of both seasonality and then knowing where you're living and your climate and that affecting your constitution. So great point.
Or if you don't get to travel, even just weather and, like some people really hate the wind, and they're probably a drier constitution, right? So there are many ways to kind of be a detective and sort of figure this out for yourself, as well as many great like energetics quizzes. I think we have a couple on our page in the blog or something, but
yeah, I love that. I just remembered in herb school, one of our instructors that was teaching us about energetics was like, there's so many ways that just physically the body expresses their energetics. So do you have more of a flushed face? How loud is your voice? You know, all these different signs. He said he would sit on Pearl Street, which is like our main walking street in Boulder. And as people would walk by, this is how he learned how to assess people's energetics. He would just in his head be like, okay, warm, dry, you know, cold and moist. And he would start, you know, making this Rolodex of constitutions to really just start looking and analyzing. And so fun activity if you're geeky and into herbal, you know, constitutions like Heather and I are.
it can be hard to turn it off.
Totally.
It can be hard to stop.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about elderberry.
Great. Yeah. So elderberry is another one that I would say that most you know, if people have only heard of a few herbs, it's typically, at least in the US, it's typically, and Canada, it's typically Echinacea and elderberry, at least lately it seems, and a few other herbs that are used much differently. So elderberry we do love as I would say a somewhat immune stimulant, definitely an immune supportive or immune adjuvant. And I would sort of preface this by saying I think its energetic is a bit warming. Interestingly, it still seems to have an anti-inflammatory effect, but on like the mucosal membranes. So if you're having sort of like achiness, headaches, sinus, you know, just kind of like feeling a little uncomfortable in your sinuses, let's say, or throat, it's an herb that has some immune supportive benefits. Seems to be anti-inflammatory, maybe not all around anti-inflammatory, but anti-inflammatory to the sort of mucosal membranes of the throat and perhaps the sinuses. It's also one of these that if you are a person who tends to run colder, can be a little bit comforting because of that warming aspect. And it's, you know, it's one that has definite research of it, you know, of it being, having some antiviral action. And that's to say there's a constituent in it that seems to, or set of constituents that seems to inhibit the formation of the capsid of common flu viruses. And so this is with many decades of research, but this is something to say, you know, it's not going to necessarily cure something, but it can sort of perhaps a little bit be a helper or sort of lower the sort of, you know, viral load that your body might be having to fight off at a particular time. The clinical studies typically show things like, you know, a very modest reduction perhaps in the days of symptoms or severity of symptoms, things of that nature. You know, consider it still a really gentle and generally gentle and food-like herb. So with that, you know, we love it, but you can expect, you know, sort of food-like or supportive level of action or results from it as well. It's also great because it's palatable, right? Like most kids will warm up to it. Most grown-ups will kind of warm up to it. So did want to mention that one.
Yeah.
Characterize it for us. Yeah.
I love that you brought up the taste because it is underrated and we can get really lost in you know, herbal compounds and constituents. But I used to tell my clients all the time, the medicine doesn't work if you don't take it. And so a lot of our herbs can be really bitter, really drying, or really intense. And so having something like elderberry can be really gentle and soothing and even sweet. And that is really important to actually get it into your body and allow it to work. So yeah, like Heather mentioned, I think elderberry I would recommend for a shorter period of time. And really wonderful herb. You know, elderberry syrup's a great way to get it in. But most of our plants, I think we're transitioning from plants into fungi. Mm-hmm. And I would say, you know, most of our plants can be used more for, and not necessarily just acute, but more on that end of the spectrum. And then as we move towards the medicinal and functional mushrooms, they shine in more of a long-term tonic sense. So a tonic is something you take every single day to build, to nourish the system. And the tradition of using functional mushrooms is as a tonic. So it's not just new to do it this way. This is where and how they've been used for literally some of our mushrooms 6 to 12,000 years in different places around the world. So using mushrooms as medicine is nothing new. It just might be new to some of us in the West. And there's so much I can talk about in like 4 minutes. Oh my God, before we get to questions. But so I really want to hit on our big 3 functional mushrooms. And if you all have questions about other mushrooms, please feel free to ask and we will have time for Q&A. But first, let's start with reishi. Okay, so if you don't know where to start with the world of functional mushrooms, I always recommend Reishi Organodermalucidum as our place to begin. Reishi is known as the queen of mushrooms. She has been revered as a tonic in specifically traditional Chinese medicine, but many other places around the world as well. And reishi is very restorative. She's warming, slightly drying, but very nourishing. And when we talked about that vital force earlier, I want you to think of reishi as building resilience to help us restore our vital force. Okay, so no matter what you're going through, reishi is such a gentle, inviting place to start to really allow our vital force to start activating again. So for Sigmatic, we put little words on our mushrooms to make it really easy and kind of bite-sized to know when and why to take them. And we call reishi our chill mushroom, right? So she does so much more than enable our bodies to chill. But when we think about chill, we think of supporting the stress response and enabling our bodies to get a deep night rest. And if you remember, Heather and I spoke in the beginning, it's not just the herbs that are going to save us. They obviously are a big piece and we believe in them deeply, but it's also these other aspects of our life, our sleep, our hydration, our exercise, our nourishment. And so by supporting our stress response, stress is like a light switch turning off other functions in our body. Literally, when our body is stressed, when we're in fight or flight survival mode, our body thinks that, there's an acute threat and all of our energy goes towards addressing that threat. So immune system is turned off, and not completely, but that's the way I want you to think of it. Like immune function completely goes down when we're in a place of stress. And so we've got to support our stress response to allow our immune system to start working optimally. And reishi is a perfect start by being both an adaptogen, right, supporting our stress response, and being an immunomodulator. Do you have anything to add about reishi?
It's the one I'm having now. I also think of it as pretty, although some may say it's a little on the dry side, I think of it as pretty neutral in its actions, meaning most anybody can use reishi. I've not really seen side effects other than it is a little bit dry, but that can always be addressed with blending it with herbs that are a little bit more moist. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, reishi is amazing. So if reishi is our queen, the next mushroom I want to touch on is our king, which is chaga or Enotis obliquus. Chaga is a really cool mushroom. Oh, I forgot. I put the mushrooms behind me. Yes, chaga. Okay.
I don't think it shows up very well on the camera because it's so dark, and it's dark here, but
where's your chaga from?
Bunkers. So a customer and client in Vermont, I used to live in Vermont, gave these to me because her husband took them off or found them or took them off a tree and wanted her to ID them. And then she didn't want them to go to waste. So she gave them to me, and they're precious and they're a good sort of model. So I have them.
They're gorgeous.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that's so great. I've never been on a webinar with someone and they also have a chaga behind them. So that is amazing.
This is how all my dates start.
I pull chaga and different mushrooms out of my bags. But this is chaga. So super interesting. And I also wanted to show you all reishi for those that haven't seen reishi. So this is our reishi. Really different from what many people think of when they hear mushrooms, right? These are really hard, conky. They grow off trees. Chaga specifically grows, is a host. The host tree is a birch, so it's a parasite to birch trees. And it has this really dark color. Okay, when we think about foods that are really colorful, I feel like I have students in the room. What do you think of? Hopefully lots of antioxidant properties, right? Black foods are so important. And chaga has a ton of antioxidant properties, which are so critical for our immune functioning. And so the important things with chaga, like all of our functional mushrooms, they need to be extracted to actually have those antioxidant properties be accessible by your body. And they can be extracted in either a long hot water boil, right? So in a decoction or in a tincture format, or both, right? Chaga energetically is warming, and depending on your taste buds, it's pretty bitter. Some people find it slightly sweet energetically, but it's again similar to reishi. It's pretty neutral in its ability to work with a really wide range of bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So our king and queen are our chaga and our reishi. And I want to touch on one more mushroom, which is lion's mane.
Nice. You have one of those too. Oh,
It
nice.
looks really different when it's dry. So this is the dried lion's mane. If you see it fresh, which it's almost lion's mane foraging season here in California, it has these long white cascading hairs. So these like strands, kind of like the mane of a lion. But its true name is Hericium erinaceus. And just like our reishi and our chaga, it has these immunomodulating polysaccharides, right? So if you're looking in different herb texts, you'll likely see that as IPs. So your shortcut to knowing what that is, but know that the IPs are the cruise control for your immune system, right? So you have that shortcut. Like our other mushrooms, lion's mane is pretty mild in nature. It does have a tonic action. And we didn't talk about this before, but Heather, do you want to share what a tonic action does and why that's important?
Yeah, so a tonic, when I was a wee herbalist, I might have thought of it as just exactly the same as an adaptogen or something like that. But I would say that the definition of a tonic is that it's going to be something you can take often. But additionally, part of the definition is that it really supports function, and often that's in the way of being nutritive or, sort of supplying, material and, nutrients and energy to support function, as well as sometimes also having kind of like an energetic exertion on a function. Like for other tonics, it might like exert more, support of elimination or assimilation. I'd say lion's mane is more in the kind of like nutritive supporter tonic, and definitely like a nice nervous system tonic.
Yeah, absolutely. All three of these functional mushrooms are adaptogens, so they're going to support our stress response. But yeah, lion's mane specifically has an affinity towards, it's been called, like, can I say this? But has an affinity towards the nervous system. So yeah, really, when we take our functional mushrooms, we're kind of getting two birds with one stone, but really supporting both the stress and the immune system from both of those approaches, from this really root-based vital approach. So
and it is a food. So I like to add that too. You may have said that. I was looking at some of our questions. It is a food, so you can feel pretty confident using it.
Yes. Yeah, you can use many of our functional mushrooms can be used both culinarily and more medicinally based on how you extract them. So note that if you're getting a tincture or a decoction of a lion's mane, the strength is going to be quite different than if you eat it in a meal. But I encourage using mushrooms in all of the ways. Eat them for dinner and take them as teas. But do note that depending on the species, mushrooms can be a large percentage of water. And so an extract is exponentially more potent than you're going to be getting those compounds if you're just eating it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to leave. We have 5 minutes, which is crazy. And Heather and I can stay for a few moments if yes. Those of you, we want to get to as many questions as we can. But I do want to share before we jump into those that we made you a special discount code. Heather and I are drinking our mushroom blend, or Heather's drinking chai.
I'm having a latte mix, but I have that too.
It's both amazing. This has all of the mushrooms and we spoke about this evening, and yeah.
And it's really dark and rich. Like there's really no effort here. It really instantly makes a really nice rich drink.
Thanks. Yep, it does. And yeah, so we made you a discount code that works both on forsigmatic.com. It's Immune Webinar. So that's really simple to remember. And so you can go. We actually have an immune sale going on right now, and you can use that on top of the discounted immune supporting functional mushroom products and adaptogen products on there. So really, we're trying to do our part to keep you all healthy and nourished and vital at this really wild time in our lives. So I encourage you to use that on For Sigmatic and on Herbal Academy.
Yes. Yes, we have 10% off for courses as well. So especially if you're interested in one of the bigger courses, that could really be a really great value. So we have over a dozen, I think maybe close to 20 courses, some that you could do in like a short period of time if you're really diligent, some that actually will take you like a year or two or even more of instruction. So definitely check out the offerings. There are again some that you could, if you're diligent, do in a month. We typically call them like 3 or 6 month courses, but definitely check that out.
Yeah, amazing. And Heather and I also made a giveaway for all of you. If you do have social media, it's on Instagram, and we are giving away a whole bundle of our favorite For Sigmatic immune supporting products, as well as a free Herbal Academy course. Yes. And so you can all still go enter that if you'd like. So you can either go to For Sigmatic's page or the Herbal Academy's page, and you'll see it on there. And I do have to mention that we had a troll.
I know, that's what I woke up to. I know, but yeah.
So enter, and if you get a count saying you won already, we haven't chosen a winner yet. So I'm sorry if there's false hope there, but we're trying to deal with it, and we'd love you all to still enter because we want someone who's really excited about learning more about these products and learning about them by using them, right? There's such equal power in just listening and talking and reading, as well as experiencing them for yourself. Some of the best learning I've ever done is when I just work with one herb or one mushroom for a week or a couple months at a time, and you really feel it and get to know it personally. So start working with them. We want you to start using them, feeling them in your body. And then of course, both Heather and I are always here as resources, and we'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you tomorrow. So I know a ton of you have asked, I have to go, is this recorded? We're recording the whole thing. You'll get a copy of it. And we'll also share some additional resources as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We have
I saw one super important quick question. Asha, she's scrolled up in the feed now, but Asha was asking, as far as the energetic piece, do you look for something that has the same energetics as you? Like, are you looking to match it that way? Or are you looking for kind of the opposite in the balance? And I definitely wanted to mention that, in that typically we're talking about something that would balance your constitution or your energetics. There are like acute instances that would be different, but typically, like if you run really cold and cold aggravates you, the herbs that are warming, moving, increased circulation, those are going to be the ones that you will be the most overall happy with, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. I was thinking about, I studied Ayurvedic medicine in India, and we have different doshas, right, in Ayurveda that are really similar to the constitutions in Western herbalism. And a lot of times, if, for example, I'm Pitta, which is the kind of fiery dosha, and a lot of times you'll crave that which is keeping you out of balance.
Yes. Yeah.
So even though I should be eating to balance my dosha, more of a less spicy, more grounding roots, maybe cooling foods, what I crave are spices and fermented foods and dried foods, and that actually keeps my pitta alive. So that's a really great question to know, like, is my body giving me the right messages? That's something I hear a lot, when it comes to how do I choose what's right for me? We want to make sure that our body is being nourished and supported so that the signs our body is giving us are actually accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
A very obvious example of this is with sugar. I saw a couple people asking about sugar. If we eat sugar first thing in the morning, we get on this roller coaster of a sugar spiral, right? We get this peak and this valley, and we're up and down, and it's like, oh, but my body's telling me I need more sugar. It's like, okay, but your body's talking to you from a place of imbalance. So, we really want to, whether we talk about it from a doshic perspective or from the constitution, to really bring us into balance. So if you're cold, bringing in warming herbs. If you're really dry, bringing in some moistening herbs. And from there, your body will start to give you messages and tell you what you need, but listening to our body from a place of balance rather than from a place of imbalance.
Mm-hmm. And I find that the gentle, boring herbs actually can be pretty effective when it's a good match. Like I've noticed people who are already kind of warm, other herbalists, if we're talking about an herb that's sort of gently warming, they're like, but is that very strong? And I'm like, well, it's strong for the person who needs that and responds to that. Some herbs, like I'm pretty moist, and I don't really I'm not very moved by like moistening or drying, right? But you'll start to pick up on how some of the herbs that seem so gentle and like totally safe can really have some power in the right applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's choose a few more questions if you're
Yeah.
okay with it.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Diana is asking, and I think this is a great question, would you recommend taking mushrooms in capsules? And Diana, the important thing to note with taking functional mushrooms is that they must be extracted for all of those beneficial compounds we talked about tonight to be bioavailable to your body. So whether that's in a powder, whether that powder has been encapsulated is really beyond the point. What you want to look for is ideally the fruiting body grown on the woods it evolved to grow on, and that's been extracted. And that's what we do with 4 Sigmatic, and we have them in powdered forms because we really believe, I talk about, we're reviving a tradition, and part of using plants and mushrooms is really being able to taste them, right? The digestion system starts in our mouth, and so really getting to take a time out to make a cup of tea, to drink that which is nourishing your body feels really important. So that's my bias, but again, the medicine doesn't work if you don't take it. So if you want to take capsules, absolutely do that, but make sure that it's the extracted log-grown fruiting body.
Mm-hmm. I see one that I think is pretty simple but important. What are the dangers, if any, with combining mushrooms or herbs? Does it lower the effectiveness of them at all? As far as does it lower the effectiveness, I would tend to say typically not. Even if you're combining things that are like warming and cooling or drying and moistening, sometimes that is something we do intentionally, because like an herb like rhodiola is very potent and effective, but it's also so dry. So we might add a moistening herb. So that's more of an example of like tempering, sort of like a side action of it. But I definitely like to assure people that, like, when we're talking about the generally food-like and safe herbs, and I would say anything we've talked about tonight or anything along the same level of kind of like safety and potency, it's not like a chemistry experiment where you're going to create some kind of reaction that could be dangerous. It's more of just an additive effect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Formulation is such an art, and there's so much synergy that takes place when we combine different mushrooms with other mushrooms, and herbs with other herbs, and mushrooms with herbs. And so we're going to have to do another webinar all about herbal energetics and formulation. But
Yeah.
I'll say quickly, when it comes to combining our mushrooms like we do in our mushroom blend, the compounds that are consistent across the different species really shine. So the polysaccharides, right, these beta glucans that are supporting our immune system, that are present in all of our functional mushrooms, that is what we're really, that's really going to shine through a formula that combines different mushrooms, rather than, just using, say, the lion's mane on its own with a rhodiola, right? That's going to be more directed towards supporting productivity So you can actually play with different formulas to have a different effect and to have the compounds of those species work in a specific area of your body.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, formulation is wonderful. And maybe we'll choose one more because we're 5 past the hour, and I know you all are amazing and so grateful, but
I
one or
see.
two more.
Yeah, I see a confirmation on the discount code. Question is it immune space webinar or immune webinar or something else?
Great question. It's immune webinar, one word, no spaces.
Okay.
And you'll type that in at checkout at foursigmatic.com. And
Go
I'll
for
put that in the follow-up email tomorrow too, so don't worry.
Yeah. I think we might give you a couple articles too, like just articles along the lines of things we talked about and things that we might have talked about given more time.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Do we want to choose one more? I love all these questions. I would stay here all night with you all. It's late for a lot of people though. Heather, I'm going to let you choose.
Well, I keep seeing these like contest ones, which I want to mention. How do we enter in the drawing? So I think this is correct. The Instagram page for Sigmatic,
Yes.
or for Herbal Academy. For either one, you'll see the same recent post that's illustrated with some mushrooms on the border, and it's about this webinar. But if you open or click on that, you'll see a bit more info, which includes the contest, right?
Yep, that's perfect.
That's one way to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'm so grateful for your time, Heather. I'm so grateful for all of you for being here and caring about the herbs and the mushrooms and supporting your immune system in a holistic, vitalist way. We could literally talk to you for 3 hours, but I hope you, as I said, are more curious than where you came in. You have more tools to work with. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to dive into. And both the Herbal Academy and myself and everyone at Sigmatic are so here to be allies and make it as easy as possible to bring these really powerful species into your daily lives to support yourselves and your families, and just be here at wild times. So with that, I'll say good night, and thanks again, Heather. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for hosting us, and it's been really great to talk herbs and mushrooms with you. Hope to do it again.
Me too. Talk soon.
All right, bye.